The emergency beacon cut through the static like a scream in the dark. Elena Martinez wiped grease from her hands and stared at the communication panel aboard her salvaged ship, the Reclaimer. 3 years of working the Outer Rim had taught her to ignore most distress calls. Pirates used fake beacons to lure salvagers into traps, and corporate ships could afford their own rescue operations. But this signal was different. The frequency was old, ancient even by galactic standards. Elena's computer couldn't identify the origin species, and that alone made her curious enough to investigate. In a galaxy where every civilization had been cataloged and contacted, finding something unknown was like discovering buried treasure. The signal led her to a debris field in an unnamed system. Chunks of metal drifted in the void, glinting in the light of a distant red dwarf star. Elena maneuvered the Reclaimer carefully through the wreckage, her scanning equipment working overtime to map the field. Most of the debris was too small or damaged to be worth salvaging, but one piece caught her attention. A massive ship fragment, nearly a kilometer long, tumbled slowly through space. The hull design was unlike anything in the galactic database. Instead of the smooth curves favored by most species or the angular efficiency of human engineering, this vessel had organic lines that flowed like water frozen in metal. Scales seemed to overlap across its surface, and what looked like wing structures jutted from its sides. Elena docked with the fragment using magnetic clamps and suited up for EVA. Her suit's lights cut through the darkness of the alien vessel as she made her way through twisted corridors. Emergency lighting still functioned in some sections, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. The air composition readings showed the atmosphere was still breathable for most oxygen-breathing species, though the temperature was well below freezing. The ship's architecture confirmed Elena's growing suspicion about its builders. Everything was sized for beings much larger than humans. Doorways towered overhead, and the corridor widths could accommodate creatures the size of Earth's ancient dinosaurs. Claw marks scored the walls in places, though whether from damage or normal was impossible to determine. Elena followed the emergency beacon's signal deeper into the ship. Her boots echoed in the vast spaces, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking through a cathedral rather than a spacecraft. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Even damaged, the vessel showed attention to detail that went beyond mere function. Art and engineering blended seamlessly. The beacon led her to what appeared to be a hibernation bay. Dozens of crystalline pods lined the walls, each large enough to hold a creature the size of an earth whale. Most were dark and empty, their occupants long dead or evacuated. But 3 pods still glowed with soft internal light, their life support systems somehow still functioning after what Elena's scan suggested was centuries adrift. Elena approached the nearest active pod and peered through the crystal. Inside, suspended in some kind of fluid, was a creature that made her breath catch. It was clearly juvenile, perhaps the size of an earth elephant, with iridescent scales that shifted from deep blue to silver in the pod's light. Wings were folded against its serpentine body, and a proud head rested on coiled neck. Even in hibernation, there was something noble about the creature's bearing. A dragon. An actual dragon. Elena had heard the stories, of course. Every spacefaring civilization had legends of the great Wyrms, the first sapient species to achieve interstellar flight. They had explored the galaxy millions of years before any other race had even evolved intelligence. But they had vanished so completely that most scientists considered them mythology. Now Elena stood before proof that the legends were true. Her scanner detected faint neural activity in all 3 pods. The creatures were alive, but trapped in failing life support systems. Elena's engineering background let her recognize the signs. The power systems were running on reserve energy that wouldn't last much longer. Days, maybe weeks at most. Elena made her decision quickly. She couldn't move the pods safely with the Reclaimer's equipment, but she could jury-rig a more stable power supply. Her ship's fusion reactor could provide the energy needed to keep the hibernation systems running while she figured out a long-term solution. Working carefully, Elena ran power cables from her ship to the alien hibernation bay. The technology was incompatible at first, but human engineering had always excelled at making different systems work together. Elena spent hours adapting power converters and building interface circuits. It was delicate work, made more difficult by her bulky EVA suit, but she had always been good with her hands. As she worked, Elena studied the hibernation pods more closely. The technology was far beyond anything the current galactic community could produce. The pods didn't just maintain life, they actively repaired cellular damage and prevented aging. The occupants could theoretically remain in hibernation indefinitely, as long as power was maintained. The youngest dragon, the one Elena had noticed first, seemed to respond to her presence. Its scales shimmered more brightly when she approached, and she could swear its breathing patterns changed. Elena found herself talking to it as she worked, describing what she was doing and reassuring the creature that help was coming. "Don't worry, little one," she murmured through her suit calm. "I know you can't understand me, but you're safe now. I'm going to figure out how to wake you up properly." Elena finished the power connections just as her suit's air supply reached the halfway mark. The hibernation pods hummed with renewed energy, their displays showing stable readings for the first time in centuries. Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before heading back to her ship to plan the next phase of the rescue. Back aboard the Reclaimer, Elena pored over the technical data she had gathered. The Dragon ship's computers were still partially functional, and she was slowly learning to interface with them. The language was unlike anything in a galactic database, but Elena had always been good with patterns and codes. What she learned changed everything she thought she knew about galactic history. The great Wyrms hadn't vanished voluntarily. They had been fleeing something, a catastrophe that had threatened not just their species, but all life in the galaxy. The ship Elena had found was one of many evacuation vessels, carrying the last survivors of a once mighty civilization into the darkness between stars. The ship's log spoke of a war against entities from outside the galaxy, beings of pure energy that consumed matter and thought alike. The Wyrms had fought bravely, but were ultimately overwhelmed. Their last act was to scatter their young across the void in hibernation ships, hoping that someday the threat would pass, and their children could reclaim their birthright. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just dealing with 3 sleeping aliens. She was holding the future of an entire species in her hands. The ship's medical bay provided more information about the hibernation process. The pods were designed to gradually wake their occupants over a period of days, allowing their systems to readjust to active metabolism slowly. The process was automated, but required specific conditions to trigger properly. Elena spent the next week studying the requirements. The dragons needed not just stable power, but the right atmospheric conditions, proper nutrition, and, most importantly, the presence of an adult of their species to guide them through the awakening process. Without that guidance, the juveniles could suffer permanent psychological damage. But Elena was the only adult available, and she wasn't a dragon. Still, she refused to give up. Elena had always believed that every problem had a solution. You just had to be creative enough to find it. She began modifying the hibernation protocols, using her understanding of human psychology and development to create what she hoped would be an adequate substitute for parental guidance. Elena recorded thousands of hours of gentle voices, soothing sounds, and positive affirmations. She programmed the ship's computer to play them during the awakening process. She couldn't be a dragon parent, but she could provide comfort and reassurance during what would undoubtedly be a frightening experience for the young creatures. The atmospheric requirements were easier to manage. Elena's ship carried enough oxygen and trace gases to create a breathable environment for the dragons. The gravity was trickier, but Elena managed to rig a rotation system that could provide the centrifugal force the dragons would need. Nutrition was the biggest challenge. The dragons were carnivores, requiring specific proteins and minerals that weren't available in Elena's emergency rations. Elena had to get creative, synthesizing what she could and hoping it would be sufficient for the initial stages of awakening. As Elena worked, she found herself growing attached to the 3 sleeping dragons. She named them based on their scale patterns: cobalt for the youngest with blue-silver scales, copper for the middle one with reddish-brown coloring, and obsidian for the largest with deep black scales shot through with veins of silver. Elena talked to them constantly as she prepared for their awakening. She told them about Earth, about humanity's journey to the stars, about the current state of the galaxy. She didn't know if they could hear her, but it helped her feel less alone in the vast emptiness of space. 2 weeks after Elena had first discovered the hibernation bay, she was ready to begin the awakening process. She had moved the reclaimer inside the larger ship's cargo hold for better access and had established a temporary living space where the dragons could safely emerge from their pods. Elena started with Cobalt, the smallest and hopefully most resilient of the 3. She initiated the awakening sequence according to the modified protocols she had developed. The pod began to drain slowly, and Elena watched as the young dragon's breathing became deeper and more regular. Hours passed. Elena monitored the dragon's vital signs, making small adjustments to the atmospheric mixture and temperature as needed. Finally, Cobalt's eyes opened for the first time in centuries. The dragon's gaze was intelligent and aware, far beyond what Elena had expected from a juvenile. Those ancient eyes looked around the chamber, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings before settling on Elena. There was no fear in that gaze, only curiosity and something that might have been gratitude. Cobalt tried to speak, but only managed a soft chirping sound. Elena smiled and activated the translation program she had been working on. It wasn't perfect, but it might allow basic communication. "Hello," Elena said softly. "My name is Elena. You're safe." Cobalt's head tilted, processing the strange sounds. Then, in a voice like wind chimes, the young dragon replied in accented but understandable galactic standard. "You are not Wyrm. Why do you aid us, small flesh?" Elena's heart raced. The dragon could speak, could think, could reason. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was first contact with a legendary species thought extinct for millions of years. "Because it was the right thing to do," Elena answered honestly. "Your ship was dying. You needed help." Cobalt considered this for a long moment. "The others told us that small flesh were selfish, concerned only with profit and territory. Yet you risked yourself for strangers. This is curious." Elena felt a chill. "What others?" "The Void Singers. The hunger that thinks. They came from between stars and devoured all they touched. They spoke lies about the younger races, said you could not be trusted with the galaxy's guardianship." The pieces clicked together in Elena's mind. The energy beings that had driven the WYRMS into exile hadn't just been destroyers. They had been manipulators, turning the galaxy's species against each other by spreading mistrust and hatred. "The others lied," Elena said firmly. "Not all of us are perfect, but many of us try to do what's right. That's why I'm here." Cobalt's scales shimmered with what Elena was learning to recognize as the dragon equivalent of smile. "Yes, I see this truth in your actions, Elena friend. You salvage more than metal and circuits. You salvage hope." Over the following days, Elena carefully awakened copper and obsidian. Each awakening went more smoothly than the last, as Elena refined her techniques, and the dragons helped guide their siblings through the process. The 3 young WYRMS were overjoyed to find themselves together and unharmed after so many centuries. Elena learned that while the dragons appeared juvenile, they were actually quite old by most species standards. Their kind aged slowly, remaining in adolescent forms for decades before reaching full maturity. Cobalt was the equivalent of a human teenager, while Obsidian was approaching young adulthood. The dragons were eager to learn about the current galaxy, and Elena found herself in the unique position of being a cultural ambassador for all of modern civilization. She shared histories, showed them star charts, and described the various species that now filled the space once ruled by their ancestors. The Wyrms were particularly interested in humanity. Elena's species was unknown to them, having evolved long after the dragon's exile. They were fascinated by human adaptability and ingenuity, traits that had allowed Elena to succeed where others might have failed. "Your people are young, but clever," Obsidian observed during one of their long conversations. "We sense great potential in humanity. Perhaps when we are grown, we might learn from each other." Elena felt a surge of pride, mixed with responsibility. These dragons would likely outlive her by millennia. The impression she made now could shape their species' relationship with humanity for generations to come. As the dragons recovered their strength, they began to share more about their culture and history. Elena learned that the Wyrms were not just powerful beings, but also master engineers and scientists. Their technology was based on principles that current galactic civilization was only beginning to understand. The hibernation pods were just the beginning. The Dragon ship contained fabrication systems that could create matter from pure energy, propulsion systems that could fold space itself, and weapons that could crack moons. But more importantly, it contained libraries of knowledge accumulated over millions of years of galactic exploration. Elena realized she was looking at a treasure trove that could advance galactic civilization by thousands of years. But the dragons were clear about their intentions. The knowledge would be shared freely, but only with those who proved themselves worthy of trust. "Power without wisdom is destruction," Copper explained. "We learned this watching our own kind fall to pride and arrogance. The younger races must prove they can handle responsibility before they inherit the galaxy's guardianship." Elena understood the weight of what she was hearing. The dragons weren't just survivors of an ancient civilization. They were the inheritors of that civilization's responsibility to guide and protect younger species. As the weeks passed, Elena found herself becoming more than just a rescuer. She became a friend, a confidant, and something approaching a family member to the three young dragons. They taught her their language, shared their history, and included her in their plans for the future. The dragons were not content to simply drift through space waiting for rescue. They wanted to rejoin galactic civilization, to take up their ancestors' role as guardians and teachers. But they needed Elena's help to make contact safely. "The younger races may fear us," Obsidian admitted. "We are legends to them, stories told to frighten or inspire. They may see us as threats rather than allies." Elena nodded dojehashfully. "Then we need to approach this carefully. Introduce you gradually. Let people get used to the idea before revealing everything." Together, they developed a plan. Elena would return to civilized space and make discreet inquiries about interest in dragon artifacts and lore. If she could find sympathetic scientists or historians, she could arrange controlled meetings with the dragons. Gradually, the truth would be revealed. It was a long-term plan that would require patience and careful execution. But Elena was committed to seeing it through. She had salvaged more than 3 dragon lives. She had salvaged hope for an entire species and possibly for galactic civilization itself. As Elena prepared to leave the derelict ship, the dragons presented her with a gift. It was a small crystal pendant, carved in the shape of a dragon in flight. The crystal pulsed with inner light and felt warm to the touch. "This is a memory crystal," Cobalt explained. "It contains part of our ship's database and will serve as proof of our existence when the time comes to reveal the truth. But more than that, it marks you as Wyrm friend, one who has earned our eternal gratitude." Elena accepted the pendant with reverence. She understood that she was being honored in a way that few beings in galactic history had ever experienced. The 3 dragons would remain aboard their ship, hidden in the outer rim, while Elena laid the groundwork for their return to galactic society. It would be months or even years before they could safely reveal themselves, but they were patient. Their kind had waited centuries already. Elena took her leave with promises to return soon. As a reclaimer pulled away from the ancient dragon ship, she could see the three young Wyrms watching from the observation deck. They raised their heads in a gesture she had learned was both farewell and blessing. The salvager who had set out to investigate an unusual signal was returning home as something much more. Elena Martinez was now the bridge between humanity and the most ancient civilization in the galaxy. She carried with her not just proof of dragons' existence, but the promise of a new age of cooperation and wonder. Elena set course for the nearest civilized system, her mind already working on the delicate problem of how to reintroduce dragons to a galaxy that had forgotten they ever existed. It would require all of her engineering skills, and then some, but Elena had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. Behind her, the dragon ship faded into the darkness between stars, waiting for the day when its young passengers could reclaim their rightful place as guardians of the galaxy. That day was coming, Elena promised herself. She would make sure of it. 3 months after leaving the dragon ship, Elena found herself in the most unlikely place for a salvager, the prestigious Galactic Archaeological Institute on Centauri Prime. The Institute's towering spires reached toward the sky like crystalline fingers, housing the galaxy's most extensive collection of ancient artifacts and the scholars who studied them. Elena clutched the memory crystal pendant beneath her shirt as she walked through the Institute's marble corridors. She had spent weeks researching the right person to approach, someone with both the expertise to understand what she had found and the discretion to handle the information carefully. Dr. Yask Thornweave fit the profile perfectly. The elderly Verdani archaeologist was renowned for his work on pre-contact civilizations and had written extensively about the theoretical possibility of surviving Elder Race artifacts. More importantly, his personnel file suggested he was more interested in knowledge than fame or profit. Elena found Dr. Thornweave in his cluttered office, surrounded by holographic displays of ancient star charts and artifact fragments. The Verdani looked up from his work as Elena knocked on the open door. His bark-like skin was marked with the silver streaks of advanced age, and his multiple eyes focused on her with sharp intelligence. "Ms. Martinez, I presume." Dr. Thornweave's voice had the rustling quality common to his plant-based species. "Your message mentioned theoretical elder race technology. An interesting topic for a salvager to pursue." Elena settled into the chair across from his desk, feeling slightly out of place among all the academic credentials and honors that decorated the walls. "Dr. Thornweave, I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you must remain confidential until we determine the best way to proceed." The archaeologist's photosynthetic patches darkened with interest. "You have my word, Ms. Martinez. The Institute takes discovery protocols very seriously." Elena pulled out the memory crystal pendant, watching as Dr. Thornweave's multiple eyes widened in recognition. Even without activation, the crystal's unusual properties were obvious to a trained archaeologist. "This is authentic elder race craftsmanship," Dr. Thornweave breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you find it?" "In the outer rim. But that's not the important part." Elena activated the crystal using the method Cobalt had taught her. The office filled with holographic displays showing technical schematics, star charts, and, most importantly, clear images of the three young dragons. Dr. Thornweave's reaction was immediate and profound. The elderly Verdani actually fell back in his chair, his bark skin paling to an almost white shade. "By the growing seasons, are those actual WYRMS?" "Very much alive and in need of help," Elena confirmed. "Dr. Thornweave, I need to know, if the dragons returned to galactic society, what would the response be?" The archaeologist spent several minutes studying the holographic displays, his scientific training warring with obvious emotional shock. "Ms. Martinez, do you understand what you found? The WYRMS aren't just legendary. They're foundational to galactic civilization. Every major species has myths about them. They're the reason we have standardized time measurements, basic physics principles, even the common galactic language. Elena nodded. The dragons told me they were teachers before they were driven into exile. They want to resume that role, but they're concerned about how the younger races would react. Dr. Thornweave stood and began pacing, his woody hands clasped behind his back. The reaction would be complex. There would be wonder, certainly. Every archaeologist, historian, and xenobiologist in the galaxy would want to meet them. But there would also be fear. Fear of what? Of being judged and found wanting, Dr. Thornweave said quietly. The Wyrms were godlike to our ancestors. If they return, they'll see everything we've done with the galaxy they once ruled. Our wars, our prejudices, our failures. Some would welcome their guidance, but others would see them as a threat to current power structures. Elena felt a chill of recognition. The energy beings that had driven the dragons into exile had been right about one thing. Many of the younger races were suspicious and territorial. The wrong approach could turn the dragons' return into a catastrophe. Then, we need to be very careful about how we handle this, Elena said. The dragons aren't looking to reclaim rulership. They want to help, to teach, to protect. But only if they're welcomed. Dr. Thornweave stopped pacing and fixed Elena with his most serious expression. Ms. Martinez, I want to help you with this. But I need to understand your motivations. You could have sold this information to the highest bidder or kept it secret entirely. Why are you risking everything to help 3 alien children? Elena thought about the question for a long moment. It was something she had asked herself many times during the long journey back to civilized space. Because they needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. Because they trusted me when they had every reason to be suspicious. And because I think the galaxy needs what they have to offer. The archaeologist nodded slowly. Very well. I believe your motives are genuine. Now, how do we proceed? They spent the next several hours developing a preliminary plan. Dr. Thornweave would use his position at the Institute to gauge academic interest in theoretical elder race contact protocols. Elena would continue to serve as a liaison with the dragons, keeping them informed of developments while maintaining their security. The key was to build support gradually among scientists, historians, and other intellectuals before approaching governments or military organizations. The academic community would be more interested in the knowledge the dragons could provide than in their potential as weapons or tools of power. Dr. Thornweave also suggested bringing in Dr. Kess Mindbridge, a human xenopsychologist who specialized in first contact scenarios. Her expertise would be valuable in preparing both the dragons and the galactic community for eventual open contact. Elena agreed to the suggestion, though she insisted on vetting Dr. Mindbridge personally before revealing any details. Trust would have to be earned step by step. Over the following week, Elena met with Dr. Mindbridge at the Institute. The human psychologist was younger than Elena had expected, with the kind of intense curiosity that marked the best researchers. She listened to Elena's carefully edited version of events with growing excitement. You're talking about managing first contact with a species that's older than recorded galactic history, Dr. Mindbridge said when Elena finished her explanation. The psychological implications are staggering, both for them and for us. Elena studied the psychologist carefully. Dr. Mindbridge, if such a contact were to occur, what would be your primary concerns? Culture shock primarily. Any surviving elder race individuals would be dealing with a completely transformed galaxy. Their entire frame of reference would be invalidated. Meanwhile, we'd be forced to confront our own insignificance in galactic history. The potential for psychological damage on both sides is enormous. Dr. Mindbridge leaned forward, her expression intense. But done correctly, it could also be the most significant positive development in galactic history. The knowledge exchange alone could advance our civilization by millennia. Elena made her decision. Over Dr. Thornweave's mild protests, she activated the memory crystal again. Dr. Mindbridge's reaction was everything Elena had hoped for. Wonder, professional excitement, and an immediate focus on the practical challenges ahead. "They're so young," Dr. Mindbridge murmured, studying the holographic images of the dragons. "That actually works in our favor. Young minds are more adaptable, more willing to accept change. If these were ancient adults set in their ways, the cultural integration challenges would be much more severe." With Dr. Mindbridge on board, their small team began developing detailed contact protocols. The psychologist's insights were invaluable in understanding how the dragons might react to various approaches and how to minimize psychological trauma for all parties involved. Meanwhile, Dr. Thornweave was making careful inquiries within the academic community. He presented the discussions as theoretical exercises in first contact preparation, gauging reactions to various scenarios involving elder race survival. The responses were encouraging, but mixed. Most academics were thrilled by the possibility, but there were also concerns about verification, containment, and the potential for fraud or misunderstanding. The galaxy had seen too many false claims of elder race contact to take such announcements lightly. Elena made regular trips back to the dragon ship, keeping Cobalt, Copper, and Obsidian informed of progress while also learning more about their culture and capabilities. The young dragons were patient but increasingly eager to take a more active role in their reintegration. During one visit, Obsidian made a suggestion that changed everything. "Elena, friend, perhaps we approach this wrongly. You speak of introducing us to your people as if we are helpless hatchlings requiring protection. But we are Wyrm kin. We are meant to be teachers, not students." Cobalt and Copper rumbled agreement. "What if we demonstrated our value through action rather than words?" Copper suggested, "Let us help solve a problem your people cannot, and they will see we are allies, not threats." Elena was intrigued, but cautious. "What kind of problem did you have in mind?" The dragons exchanged glances, their scales shimmering with what Elena had learned indicated intense communication. They could share thoughts directly when touching, an ability that still amazed her. "We have been monitoring your communication networks," Obsidian said finally. "There's a crisis developing in the Kepler sector, a plague that affects multiple species, resistant to all current medical treatments. Your people are desperate for a solution." Elena felt her pulse quicken. She had heard about the Kepler crisis through official channels. A mysterious disease was spreading through the sector's colonies, killing thousands and defying all attempts at treatment. The Galactic Health Authority had quarantined the entire region. "You think you can help?" Elena asked. Cobalt nodded gravely. "The plague is not natural. It bears the signature of the Void Singer's biological weapons. We know its nature and can provide the cure. But we must act quickly, or entire worlds will perish." Elena realized she was facing a decision that would change everything. The careful, gradual approach they had been planning would take months or years to implement. But people were dying now, and the dragons claimed they could help. "If we reveal yourselves now, there will be no controlling the situation," Elena warned. "Every government, military, and media organization in the galaxy will descend on us. Then we must be prepared for that eventuality," Obsidian said calmly. "We are tired of hiding while others suffer. This is what we were meant to do." Elena contacted Dr. Thornweave and Dr. Mindbridge immediately. The three humans met aboard the Reclaimer in emergency session, arguing late into the night about the wisdom of early revelation. "It's too soon," Dr. Mindbridge insisted. "We haven't prepared the proper psychological frameworks. The shock could cause widespread panic." Dr. Thornweave disagreed. "The academic community is already primed for the possibility. And if the dragons can actually cure this plague, it will establish their credibility immediately." Elena found herself caught between caution and urgency. The dragons are right about one thing. People are dying while we debate protocols. If they can help, don't we have an obligation to let them try? In the end, it was Cobalt who settled the debate. The young dragon made a surprise appearance via holographic communication, addressing the three humans directly. "Honored small friends, we understand your concerns for proper procedure, but We are not fragile things that require protection from reality. We are Wyrm kin, inheritors of ancient responsibility. We will not hide in the darkness while plague consumes innocence. The dragon's young voice carried absolute conviction. If your people reject us afterward, we will accept that consequence. But we will not let fear prevent us from doing what is right. Elena felt a surge of pride and admiration for the young dragon. Despite their youth, the three WYRMs possessed a moral clarity that put many adults to shame. All right, Elena said finally, but we do this properly. Full disclosure to the Galactic Health Authority first, followed by controlled contact with their medical teams. No surprise announcements or dramatic revelations. Dr. Thornweave nodded grimly. I can arrange a meeting with Director Healsworth of the GHA. She's a friend, and we'll listen to evidence before making judgments. Dr. Mindbridge sighed, but agreed. I'll prepare psychological briefings for the contact teams. They'll need to understand what they're dealing with before they meet actual dragons. Elena felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. In a few days, she would be present at the most significant first contact event in galactic history. The careful salvager who had discovered 3 sleeping dragons was about to change the course of civilization itself. The meeting with Director Healsworth took place at the GHA headquarters on New Geneva. Elena, Dr. Thornweave, and Dr. Mindbridge were escorted to a secure conference room where the director waited with her chief medical officer and head of xenobiology. Director Healsworth was a no-nonsense centauri with the kind of practical efficiency Elena appreciated. She listened to their presentation without interruption, studying the memory crystal's evidence with professional detachment. Assuming this is genuine, Director Healsworth said when they finished, you're asking me to risk my career and the GHA's reputation on the word of 3 alien children claiming to be legendary beings. Elena bristled at the dismissive tone. Director, the evidence speaks for itself. These aren't just any aliens. They possess knowledge accumulated over millions of years of galactic exploration. They know things about the plague that your best researchers haven't even discovered yet. Dr. Thornweave leaned forward. Director, I've spent my entire career studying Elder Race artifacts. I stake my professional reputation on the authenticity of these individuals. Director Healsworth was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic displays that still showed the 3 young dragons. Dr. Voss, she said to her xenobiologist, what's your assessment? Dr. Voss, an elderly human with cybernetic implants covering half his skull, spoke carefully. The biological scans are consistent with theoretical elder race physiology. The technology they're displaying is centuries beyond our current capabilities. If this is a hoax, it's the most sophisticated one in galactic history. The director made her decision with typical Centauri directness. Very well. I'll authorize a limited contact protocol, but this stays classified until we can verify their claims about the plague. Dr. Mindbridge, I wanted people monitoring every aspect of the psychological interaction. If there's any sign of deception or manipulation, we shut this down immediately. Elena felt relief wash over her. The first hurdle was cleared. Now came the hard part, actually introducing the galaxy's medical establishment to 3 young dragons claiming to hold the cure for an incurable plague. The contact session was scheduled for the following week aboard a neutral medical research vessel in deep space. Elena would serve as primary liaison, while Dr. Thornweave and Dr. Mindbridge would handle the scientific and psychological aspects respectively. Elena made one final trip to the Dragon ship to prepare cobalt, copper, and obsidian for their first formal contact with galactic authorities. The young dragons were excited, but nervous, understanding the magnitude of what they were attempting. Remember, Elena told them, these people have been fighting this plague for months without success. They're desperate, but also skeptical. You'll need to prove yourselves gradually. Obsidian rumbled amusement. Elena, friend, we have been proving ourselves to skeptical beings for longer than your species has existed. Trust in our experience. Elena smiled despite her nerves. The dragons might be young by their own species standards, but they possessed wisdom far beyond their apparent years. If anyone could handle this delicate first contact, it was these three remarkable beings. As Elena prepared to leave for what might be the last time the dragons could remain hidden, Cobalt approached her with something approaching ceremony. "Elena, friend, when we meet your healing speakers, we wish to give them more than just knowledge of the plague cure. We want to offer something that will demonstrate our commitment to helping your people." The young dragon gestured to a section of their ship Elena had never seen before. Inside was a workshop containing devices that looked more like art than technology. Crystalline structures grew in organized patterns, and energy flowed through them in ways that defied Elena's understanding of physics. "These are seed forges," Copper explained. "They can create any biological compound or medical device from base elements. We wish to gift several to your healing speakers, along with the knowledge to use them safely." Elena stared at the alien devices, understanding that she was looking at technology that could revolutionize galactic medicine overnight. The dragons weren't just offering to cure one plague. They were offering to advance medical science by centuries. "Are you sure about this?" Elena asked. "This technology could change everything. That is precisely why we must share it," Obsidian said solemnly. "Knowledge hoarded becomes wisdom lost. Our ancestors made that mistake. We will not repeat it." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. These young beings, alone and vulnerable in a galaxy that had forgotten their existence, were offering gifts beyond price to the species that would soon judge them. As Elena departed the dragon ship for what she hoped would be the last time it remained hidden, she carried with her more than just hope. She carried the promise of a new age of cooperation between the youngest and oldest civilizations in the galaxy. The meeting that would change everything was only days away. The medical research vessel Hippocrates drifted in the darkness between stars, far from any inhabited system. Elena stood in the main conference bay, watching through the viewport as the dragon ship approached. After months of secrecy and careful preparation, the moment of truth had finally arrived. Director Healsworth stood beside Elena, along with the GHA's top medical team. Dr. Thornweave and Dr. Mindbridge flanked the group, ready to provide historical and psychological support as needed. Everyone wore recording devices and carried communication equipment, though Elena doubted any of them truly understood what they were about to experience. "Contact in 5 minutes," the ship's captain announced over the comm system. Docking bay pressurized and ready for atmospheric interface. Elena felt her heart racing despite her best efforts to remain calm. She had met with the dragons dozens of times, but this was different. This meeting would determine whether her three young friends would be welcomed into galactic society or branded as threats to be contained. The dragon ship settled into the Hippocrates' expanded docking bay with graceful precision. Even damaged, the ancient vessel moved with an elegance that made the human ship look clumsy by comparison. As the airlock sealed and atmosphere equalized, Elena could see the medical team's nervousness increase. "Remember," Dr. Mindbridge said quietly, "they may look intimidating, but they're essentially adolescents by their species standards. Treat them with respect, but don't be afraid to show normal human reactions." The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Cobalt emerged first. The young dragon had grown noticeably during the months since Elena first found him, his blue-silver scales now gleaming with health and vitality. Despite his size, he moved with careful precision, clearly aware of how overwhelming his presence might be. Behind Cobalt came Copper and Obsidian, equally magnificent and equally cautious. The three dragons arranged themselves in the spacious bay, their heads held high, but their postures non-threatening. Elena felt a surge of pride at how well they handled themselves. Director Healsworth was the first to speak, her voice steady despite the obvious shock on her face. "Welcome aboard the Hippocrates. I am Director Sarah Healsworth of the Galactic Health Authority." Cobalt stepped forward slightly, his voice carrying the musical quality Elena had grown to love. We greet you with honor, Director Healsworth. I am Cobalt, and these are my clutch siblings Copper and Obsidian. We thank you for your courage in meeting with us. Elena watched as the medical team struggled to process what they were seeing. Dr. Voss, the elderly xenobiologist, was taking frantic notes while trying to record everything with his instruments. The other doctors seemed caught between professional fascination and primitive fear. Before we discuss the plague, Cobalt continued, we wish to address the uncertainty we see in your hearts. We know our existence challenges much of what your people believe about galactic history. We do not ask for blind faith, only for open minds. Copper moved forward, carrying one of the seed-forged devices Elena had seen on their ship. We bring gifts as proof of our intentions. This device can synthesize any biological compound from base elements. Its creation techniques are beyond your current understanding, but its operation is simple enough for your healers to master. The medical team's reaction was immediate and intense. Dr. Voss actually stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed any portable power source we know of. Obsidian rumbled what Elena recognized as amusement. Honored healer, your people have made remarkable progress in the brief time you have possessed technology. But you think too much in terms of brute force and too little in terms of elegant solutions. The young dragon gestured to the seed forge. This device does not create energy. It borrows it temporarily from quantum fluctuations, returning it with interest when the synthesis is complete. The universe itself provides the power. Elena watched as the implications hit the medical team like a physical blow. They weren't just looking at advanced alien technology. They were seeing principles of physics that human science was only beginning to theorize about. Director Healsworth recovered first, her practical nature asserting itself. If this device works as you claim, it could revolutionize medical treatment throughout the galaxy. But first, we need to discuss the immediate crisis. My people are dying from a plague we can't cure. You claim to understand its nature. Cobalt's expression grew grave. The plague is not natural, as your healers have suspected. It is a biological weapon created by the Void Singers, the energy beings who drove us into exile eons ago. They designed it to target the neural pathways that allow for higher reasoning and compassion. The young dragon paused, his scales darkening with what Elena knew indicated distress. The weapon was meant to reduce thinking beings to mindless aggression, making them easier for the Void Singers to manipulate. Your people's resistance to its effects speaks well of their mental strength. Dr. Martinez, the GHA's chief epidemiologist, leaned forward intently. Can you prove this? Our best analysis suggests the pathogen has artificial markers, but we can't identify the creation methodology. Copper responded by producing a crystalline data storage device. This contains our records of the Void Singers' biological weapons, including detailed analysis of their construction and function. You will find that your plague matches their standard neural degradation template precisely. As the medical team absorbed this information, Elena found herself marveling at how naturally the dragons handled the situation. Despite their youth, they possessed the confidence and knowledge of ancient beings who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Director Healsworth made the obvious next question. If you understand the plague's construction, can you cure it? Yes, Obsidian said simply. The cure is complex, but within your people's ability to produce, especially with the assistance of our seed forges. The pathogen's weakness lies in its dependence on a specific enzyme sequence that can be disrupted with the right pharmaceutical intervention. The dragon gestured to Elena. Our friend Elena has served as our bridge to your people, but she is not a healer. We would work directly with your medical specialists to ensure the cure is properly adapted for each affected species. Elena felt a mix of pride and sadness. The dragons no longer needed her as a translator or protector. They were ready to take their place in galactic society on their own terms. Over the next several hours, The dragons provided detailed technical specifications for both the plague cure and the operation of the seed-forged devices. Elena watched as the medical team's skepticism gradually gave way to amazement and excitement. Dr. Voss was practically vibrating with scientific enthusiasm. The implications go far beyond this plague. These techniques could eliminate genetic diseases, reverse aging, even allow for biological adaptation to hostile environments. All of this and more, Cobalt agreed. But it must be used wisely. Our ancestors possessed such power and more, yet they fell to forces they thought they could control. Wisdom must accompany knowledge, or both become meaningless. Director Healsworth nodded thoughtfully. You're talking about fundamentally changing how we approach medicine and biology. The social implications alone are staggering. Kappa's scales shimmered with what Elena recognized as approval. You understand correctly. This is why we chose to approach healers first rather than warriors or rulers. Those who dedicate themselves to preserving life are more likely to use such gifts responsibly. As the technical discussions continued, Elena found herself in conversation with Dr. Mindbridge about the psychological aspects of the contact. The xenopsychologist was fascinated by the dragon's behavior and communication patterns. They're handling this remarkably well, Dr. Mindbridge observed. There's none of the cultural disorientation I would expect from beings displaced in time. They seem almost prepared for this. Elena nodded. They've been studying our communications and databases for months, learning about current galactic civilization. They're not just survivors from the past. They're individuals who've adapted to the present. Dr. Mindbridge made notes on her handheld device. That's actually crucial for successful integration. They won't be seen as museum pieces or living artifacts. They're contemporary beings with ancient knowledge. The formal meeting continued for most of the day, with the dragons patiently answering questions and demonstrating their technology. Elena was impressed by how thoroughly they had prepared for this moment. Every concern the medical team raised had been anticipated and addressed. As the session drew to a close, Director Healsworth made the decision Elena had been hoping for. I'm convinced of your authenticity and your good intentions. The GHA will accept your assistance with the Kepler crisis and your offer of medical technology sharing. The director paused, her expression growing more serious. However, I want you to understand what comes next. Once we implement your cure and reveal your existence, there will be no returning to anonymity. Every government, corporation, and research institution in the galaxy will want to meet you. Obsidian rumbled acknowledgement. We understand, Director Healsworth. We have been preparing for this eventuality since Elena Friend first awakened us. We are ready to face whatever challenges await. Cobalt stepped forward. We ask only that you remember we are individuals, not repositories of ancient wisdom to be mined. We wish to be partners in building a better galaxy, not tools to be used by others. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. The young dragons she had rescued were about to become the most famous beings in the galaxy. Part of her wanted to protect them from the chaos that was coming, but she knew they were right to step forward. The implementation of the plague cure happened faster than anyone had expected. Using the dragon's seed-forged technology, the medical teams were able to synthesize treatment doses within days rather than the months it would normally take. The first test subjects showed complete recovery within hours of treatment. Elena accompanied the dragons to the Kepler sector as part of the medical relief mission. She wanted to see the fruits of their efforts firsthand, to witness the moment when the dragon's gift to galactic civilization became reality. The quarantine station orbiting New Kepler was a scene of controlled chaos. Medical ships from across the galaxy had converged on the system, carrying teams eager to implement the new treatment protocol. Elena stood with the dragons on the observation deck of the lead medical vessel, watching as shuttle after shuttle departed for the plague-stricken worlds below. It is beginning, Copper said quietly, her voice filled with satisfaction. The healing spreads, and hope returns to places where it was lost. Elena nodded, watching the tactical displays that showed treatment progress across the affected colonies. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Entire populations that had been given up for dead were recovering completely. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. Already, news of the dragon's existence was spreading through official channels. Soon, the entire galaxy would know that the ancient WYRMS had returned. The first media reports appeared 3 days after the Kepler relief operation began. Despite the GHA's attempts to control the information release, word of the dragon's involvement in curing the plague had leaked. Within hours, every news network in the galaxy was running stories about the return of the elder race. Elena watched the coverage from the medical station's common area, surrounded by off-duty personnel who couldn't believe what they were seeing. The dragons had agreed to a limited number of interviews, but they insisted Elena be present for all of them. The first major interview was conducted by Alexander Cross, the galaxy's most respected investigative journalist. Elena sat slightly off-camera as Cobalt, Copper, and Obsidian answered questions with the same patience and wisdom they had shown the medical teams. The question everyone wants answered, Cross said, is why you chose to reveal yourselves now, after remaining hidden for so long. Cobalt considered the question carefully before responding. We revealed ourselves because people were dying, and we possessed the knowledge to save them. The choice was simple, though the consequences will be complex. Cross leaned forward. But surely you could have provided the cure anonymously, through intermediaries. Why risk direct contact? It was Obsidian who answered. Because true healing requires trust, and trust requires honesty. We could not ask your people to accept our gifts while hiding our nature. Better to face judgment honestly than to succeed through deception. Elena felt proud of how well the dragons handled themselves. They came across as thoughtful, honest, and genuinely concerned with galactic welfare. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive, though Elena knew there would be those who viewed the dragon's return with suspicion or fear. Over the following weeks, the dragons were invited to address the Galactic Council, the Interspecies Science Consortium, and dozens of other organizations. Elena accompanied them to every meeting, serving as their advocate and friend rather than their handler. The council session was particularly significant. Elena stood in the gallery as the 3 young dragons addressed representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. The ancient council chamber had never hosted beings quite like these. Honored representatives, Cobalt began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. We come before you not to reclaim ancient privileges or demand recognition of past glories. We come as individuals who wish to contribute to the galaxy's future. Copper continued the address. We offer knowledge freely given, friendship honestly extended, and partnership based on mutual respect. We ask nothing in return except the opportunity to serve the cause of peace and prosperity for all thinking beings. Obsidian concluded with words that Elena knew would be remembered for generations. Our ancestors failed because they believed wisdom belonged only to the old and powerful. We have learned from their mistakes. The future belongs not to any single species or group, but to all who choose to build it together. The Council's vote to formally recognize the dragons as citizens of the galactic community was unanimous. Elena wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the 3 beings she had rescued take their place as the galaxy's newest and oldest citizens. In the months that followed, the dragons established a research foundation dedicated to sharing ancient knowledge responsibly. They insisted that Elena serve as the foundation's director, a role she accepted with pride and trepidation. The work was challenging but rewarding. Elena found herself coordinating between ancient wisdom and modern application, ensuring that the dragon's gifts were used for the benefit of all rather than the advantage of a few. The Seedforge technology revolutionized medicine, just as Dr. Voss had predicted. Genetic diseases became treatable, aging could be slowed or reversed, and biological adaptation to hostile environments became routine. But the dragons were careful to ensure the technology was distributed equitably rather than hoarded by wealthy worlds or species. Elena's life had changed completely from her days as a lone salvager. She now worked from a state-of-the-art facility on Centauri Prime, coordinating research projects that span the galaxy. But she never forgot where it all began, in the cold emptiness between stars where she had first heard a distress beacon that changed everything. The dragons grew and matured both physically and emotionally. Elena watched with maternal pride as they developed into the wise leaders their species had always produced. They never forgot that she had been the first to offer them trust and friendship when they were vulnerable and alone. On the first anniversary of their public revelation, the dragons held a ceremony to commemorate what they called the Day of New Hope. Elena was invited as the guest of honor, along with Dr. Thornweave, Dr. Mindbridge, Director Healsworth, and all the others who had helped make their integration possible. But the ceremony wasn't just about the past. The dragons unveiled plans for a new project that would dwarf everything they had accomplished so far. Using ancient star charts and navigation techniques, they intended to explore beyond the galaxy's edge, searching for other surviving civilizations that might have fled the Void Singer's assault. The galaxy is vast, Cobalt explained to the assembled dignitaries, but it is not the only source of life and wisdom. If we can find others who survived the ancient catastrophe, perhaps we can learn what happened to the Void Singers and ensure they never threaten thinking beings again. Elena felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. The young woman who had once searched the outer rim for valuable salvage was about to embark on an expedition to explore the spaces between galaxies. It was a far grander adventure than she had ever imagined possible. As the ceremony concluded and the guests mingled, Elena found herself standing alone with the three dragons in a quiet corner of the facility. These beings, who had grown from sleeping children to galactic leaders, still treated her with the affection and respect they had shown from their first awakening. "Elena, friend," Obsidian said softly, "we have never properly thanked you for the gift you gave us. Not just life, though that was precious beyond measure, but hope. You showed us that the younger races had indeed grown wise and compassionate." Cobalt nodded agreement. "You could have sold us, studied us, or simply left us to die. Instead, you chose to help strangers simply because it was right. That choice changed not just our fates, but the fate of the entire galaxy." Kappa's scales shimmered with deep emotion. "You once told us that you salvaged hope, but it was you who were the true salvage. We recovered our bodies from that derelict ship, but you recovered our faith in the goodness of thinking beings." Elena felt tears running down her cheeks. "You three have given me more than I could ever give you. You've shown me what it means to have purpose beyond just survival." As Elena looked at her friends, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A routine salvage run had become first contact. A simple rescue had become the foundation for a new age of galactic cooperation. And a lonely salvager had become part of something larger than herself. The dragons were right about one thing. She hadn't just saved three young aliens from a dying ship. She had salvaged hope itself, pulled it back from the brink of extinction, and given it new life. In return, that hope had transformed not just her life, but the entire galaxy. Elena smiled through her tears as she looked toward the viewports showing the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, other civilizations might be waiting for contact, for rescue, for hope. The adventure was just beginning, and Elena Martinez, former salvager and current bridge between civilizations, was ready for whatever came next. The Void Singers had tried to destroy hope by turning the galaxy's species against each other. But they had failed to account for the simple truth that Elena had demonstrated in a derelict ship so many months ago. When thinking beings chose compassion over suspicion, cooperation over competition, amazing things became possible. The galaxy was about to become a much larger place, and Elena couldn't wait to explore it with her three extraordinary friends by her side. Hope, once salvaged, had a way of growing beyond all expectations, and Elena suspected they had only seen the beginning of what that hope could accomplish.